If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll talk with Missouri Attorney General Catherine Hanaway about her first impressions of the important statewide post and why she's continuing the effort to oust St. Louis Sheriff Alfred Montgomery from office. But first, in the aftermath of the May 16th tornado in St. Louis, Republicans and Democrats were united behind wanting the Federal Emergency Management Agency to assist in cleanup efforts. In fact, St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer noted earlier this year that FEMA's help and money would be essential to help the city recover.
No city can shoulder the burden of a natural disaster the size of the tornado that hit us on May 16th alone. It is absolutely impossible to do that without the assistance of FEMA.
But roughly 5 months after the tornado cut a path of devastation throughout St. Louis and St. Louis County, there is now bipartisan agreement that FEMA did not act as quickly as it should have. For instance, St. Louis Alderwoman Shamim Clark Hubbard has said that not enough assistance came into her 10th ward, which suffered immense damage from the storm.
People are frustrated. They don't want to go to another meeting. They quite frankly don't need another hot dog. They need funds to rebuild, and they need a pathway to know, and they need tough people that can have honest, tough conversations with them about if this is not what you're going to be able to do, what is a plan B? Don't give up, don't walk away, please. But what is your plan B and C so that we can help you meet you there and take you forward? We're getting ready to go into a season change. It's scary.
Late last month, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley wrote a letter to FEMA administrators inquiring about delays in getting assistance provided in a timely manner.
I mean, this is what I've said to the FEMA acting director, both officially by letter and directly, person to person, which is they've got to do better than what they've done in St. Louis. And to be honest with you, Jason, this is a pattern that we've seen over and over and over, whether it's flooding, whether it's tornadoes, whether it's St. Louis, whether it's rural Missouri. It just seems like it's the same dadgum thing every time, which is they're late, they don't get the aid on time, they don't give people the assistance they qualify for. I've even seen them take back assistance from individuals that they awarded, which is absurd.
This comes after President Donald Trump's administration laid off some FEMA workers shortly after he returned to the White House. Democratic Congressman Wesley Bell, whose district includes parts of the region affected by the tornado, says the Trump administration has not made it easier for the city of St. Louis to recover.
It has been a priority of this administration to strip FEMA for parts. And the president has said as much. And so this is a matter of your budgetary decisions reflecting your values. And and what I'm seeing from some of my colleagues, many, if not all my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they're real brave when it comes to interviews, but they won't stand up to the president when it's time to cast their vote.
But Hawley says he wasn't impressed with how FEMA operated, even when the agency had higher staffing levels.
You know, I have to say, Jason, that I haven't noticed any difference in performance now than earlier because it's all been substandard, just to be honest with you. I mean, I think the truth is that every time it seems like to me Missouri has a significant disaster, we're behind the 8 ball and FEMA's not delivering. And I've had this fight with FEMA director. I mean, I've been through 3 or 4 of them now. And it's the same thing every time. Every time it's, well, we'll try to get there. Oh, we don't have the manpower. Then they're slow to get the resources. Then individual assistance, which is what goes to private citizens. They don't quite deliver it on time, or they don't have the application period open. And we could go on and on. We're seeing it again in St. Louis.
Hawley is not the only member of the Missouri federal delegation underwhelmed by federal response to disasters. Republican Congressman Sam Graves contends the agency is overly slow in delivering aid and often makes it difficult for individuals to get money for crucial repairs. So the Republican from Tarkio in northwest Missouri, who happens to be the chairman of the powerful House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, is teaming up with some of his Democratic colleagues to overhaul FEMA. That includes changing how the individual aid application process works and who oversees the agency. I spoke with Graves last week about his legislation, first asking why he felt overhauling FEMA should be a priority.
Well, the biggest thing is, the biggest reason is because FEMA is broken. It's been broken for quite a while now, to be quite honest with you. In fact, my entire time in Congress, I've worked with 4 different presidents, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and it's been broken, and it gets worse. It gets worse and worse and worse since we put FEMA in the Department of Homeland Security. It's gotten a lot worse. And so, we're tired of this. We're tired of constituents having to deal with the problems and the red tape and taking forever. And so we just decided that we need to make some serious changes rather than nibbling around the edges, make some serious changes to FEMA that matter. And, and we're moving forward with that.
So President Trump and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem have openly discussed completely eliminating FEMA. This bill that we're going to talk about more in this conversation is not eliminating the agency. Why do you feel that FEMA in some form should still exist within the federal government?
Because the federal government provides most of the funding. So here's how we want to structure it, though. We want to put the states in the driver's seat. We want the states to be in charge of recovery efforts, supported by the federal government, not the federal government being in the driver's seat. So we want to flip it around. The states are much more responsive. They're closer to the disaster than the federal government is, than a bureaucrat within the federal government. And so, again, we want to put the states in the driver's seat so that they are leading the effort, and then the federal government can support that, obviously with funding and technical or whatever assistance that is needed, but the states will get to make the determinations.
When I heard, for example, Secretary Noem talking about eliminating FEMA, I didn't react as negatively as other people did, because from a conceptual standpoint, let's just say the federal government gave the states a certain amount of money every year for disaster response. You're correct that state and local emergency responders are going to be able to react to disasters a lot quicker than the federal government. I think that sort of archetype falls apart if you're not giving the states enough money, or there's like such a terrible disaster, it goes well beyond like the allotted amount of money. What do you think of that sort of back of the napkin analysis about why there may still have to be some sort of FEMA in some form, and it's not just like a block grant program to the states?
Well, it's again, it provides framework, I guess you might say, and obviously, the federal government or Congress, we set the guidelines or try to set the guidelines. Unfortunately, we have bureaucrats that go in and they change that, or they reevaluate the language to better reflect what their priorities are rather than what Congress's priorities are. But again, as you pointed out, and as I pointed out, the states are much better at responding. They're much closer to the disaster itself. Let the states, run it. Let the states be in charge of getting that aid to those families. In some cases, we've seen aid take a year, months, best case, weeks to get to those individuals. And then in many cases, in fact, we passed a bill in 2022. I had a bill that basically was it eliminated re-victimization. And this is classic federal government. In some cases, the federal government would come back to recipients of FEMA aid maybe months or years later and want that money given back. And when we have found out that it may have been due, they may have been given money based on something that FEMA did or a mistake that FEMA made, not the individual, and yet they claw it back. And so, it's things like that. That is classic federal government bureaucracy that is gotten too big and too bloated, and they can't respond, and they can't respond not only in a timely manner, but obviously they make mistakes, and they make a lot of mistakes. So that's one of the reasons why I want to put it back into the state's hands and let them be the driver.
You actually touched on a pretty significant problem that I kind of analyzed after the St. Louis tornado. So President Trump ended up approving Governor Kehoe's emergency disaster declaration about a month after the tornado occurred. What was striking is when I looked at FEMA's approval, or when I looked at the sort of time frame between when a disaster happened and when an emergency declaration was approved, it just in Missouri, 4 weeks was actually pretty short. Sometimes it takes more than 4 weeks. Sometimes it takes a couple of months. Is there anything in this bill that would make the process more efficient so resources and federal personnel can really recover a disaster more quickly?
It does. And there's several things that we do. But we do replace that slow, bureaucratic rebuilding process. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace that with a much faster project-based grant process where states are going to be able to set the pace of that recovery. They're going to be able to reduce their dependence on consultants, which create all kinds of problems, by the way, and it throws money out into places where it's not going to actually help the individual. It's going to prioritize the highest need projects without having to take out, expensive loans or wait years for reimbursement. It streamlines the whole. One of the biggest problems with FEMA right now is this lengthy, very, very complicated process in terms of actually applying the paperwork that is involved. And this streamlines it, brings all the agencies that may have jurisdiction, it brings them together into one approval process, and it streamlines that application process considerably. And those are just a few of the things that it does to help out and get that aid quicker than it is being delivered right now.
So just to clarify, when you say the application process, is that for individual aid or is that for states to basically make the ask to the president and to FEMA to unlock all the resources that could come both to individuals and to local governments?
It's mostly for individuals themselves. So disaster survivors, they're going to complete a single streamlined application when applying for assistance and in disaster relief. And, basically it ends the confusion that's caused by this complex system. And you got to think about it. Let's say you're an individual and now your house has been flooded and all your belongings are gone, or a tornado's come through and everything is gone. Then FEMA comes rolling in and gives you this long book of application process to do. You're not thinking about that at the time. And to be quite honest with you, it's very hard to sit down and try to focus and even do this stuff. And it's ridiculous that it has to be that way. Again, that's the reason we're going to put state in the driver's seat. We're going to have state responders right there to be able to help out. We're going to streamline this application process for individuals, and we're going to make it a whole lot easier to make a determination on where money should go and prioritizing those projects and the disaster and the assistance that needs to be done.
I'm talking with Republican Congressman Sam Graves about his efforts to overhaul FEMA, and we'll continue this conversation after a short break. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to my conversation with Congressman Sam Graves, a Republican who represents Missouri's 6th congressional district, which spans most of North Missouri. Graves is part of a bipartisan effort in Congress to overhaul FEMA. Your bill also would require, quote, clear, understandable notices to disaster survivors, ending the confusion caused by complex and jargon-filled denial letters. And this caught my attention because in the case of the St. Louis tornado, I have seen instances where somebody applies, they get this denial letter like maybe an hour later, and it's clearly generated by like an algorithm, because I don't think that FEMA is like writing that letter that quickly. And then it says you're denied unless you give more information to kind of substantiate your claim. Can you kind of talk about that aspect of this?
Yeah, and that's something that we have seen. In fact, I saw it in some flooding in my district. And, again, that just further strengthens why we want to put the state in charge of making these determinations. They're so much closer to the disaster itself, individuals on the ground being able to make, timely decisions rather than through this very impersonal, very, as you pointed out, algorithm-driven denial process. And you're exactly right. In some cases, it comes out almost immediately upon submitting this long, lengthy application, and then they get denied. And they're sitting there looking at their home that has either been washed away or blown away or whatever the case may be, and they're told that, they don't qualify for disaster assistance. And it's just, it comes down to classic federal government bureaucracy that has gone too big, and they are very, very detached from the disaster or the response or the aid that is to be given, and that's the biggest problem. That's the reason we're going to bring it back to local hands.
I do want to play devil's advocate for a minute, because in both the emergency declaration approval process and also the approval process for individual aid, there has to be some sort of process in place to make sure, A, states aren't asking for disaster relief when they really don't need it, and B, like individuals aren't saying that like their homes are been damaged and they need a lot of money when they haven't. Or what sort of things are going to be put in place to make sure there is some oversight to make sure money is just not flowing to states or people that don't deserve it?
Well, and you're absolutely correct. And unfortunately, things like this happen. Unfortunately, you do have individuals, unscrupulous individuals, that will claim that they had their house was blown away or whatever the case may be, and they're scamming the system, and they're pulling down money, and then they just disappear. And it's absolutely correct, and you have to make sure that does not happen. And that may account for one of the reasons why, the process takes too long. And again, I come back to that's the reason we want to put the states in charge. The states are closer to the process. The states are closer to the disaster. They can have individuals, boots on the ground, almost immediately, and they can make the determination. Just a simple question. Show me your house. Show me or where your house was. Show me what happened. Rather than doing all of this, with a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., which is going to have no knowledge or whatever, or going to take forever for them to actually get out there and make that determination. Again, that's the reason we want to put this back into the states. And that's something that is a very bipartisan way of looking at it and way of doing it. And that's the reason this bill was able to get as much support as it was, because everybody is in agreement that the states should be in charge of this and not the federal government.
I wanted to talk about probably the most important part of this bill that you also mentioned on the outset, and that is taking FEMA out of the Department of Homeland Security and making it an independent agency that is accountable directly to the President of the United States, which was the case before 2003. Can you talk about why you think that would make FEMA a better agency?
Yes, and basically what we're doing is reestablishing it at a cabinet level position. And this does make FEMA directly responsible or accountable to the President of the United States, whoever that may be at the time. And I think it's going to help out immensely. Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security has grown into this. It's an immense bureaucratic agency that was obviously created, and a lot of things get lost in the confusion or the fog, if you will, when it comes to responses, when it comes to just about everything within Homeland Security. And I know the president's trying to clean that up. He's hoping to do that. In fact, even with FEMA, the president understands that FEMA is broken, and we need to fix this and fix it once and for all. And it's been broken for a long time. So doing that, we believe by doing that, it's going to take FEMA back to, the way it used to be, and that was, much more responsive, much more accessible agency, and that is one of the most important things that we do in this bill is reestablishing it as a cabinet level agency.
Now, one of the benefits of being the dean of the Missouri congressional delegation is you were actually in Congress when this decision was made to move FEMA into the Department of Homeland Security. Can you talk about what went into that decision and just why you think it hasn't worked out 22 years later?
Well, and this has been building over time. Again, we have seen a slow erosion of, FEMA response and in their mission, to be quite honest with you, over time. And it's taking a long time. And I fought against at the time, and the reason I fought against moving FEMA into Homeland Security was because the Transportation Committee right now has jurisdiction over FEMA and had jurisdiction over FEMA before. But that was diluted considerably because now it has dual jurisdiction. The Committee on Transportation and the Committee on Homeland Security have dual jurisdiction, and that makes it harder to get things done and to get reforms passed or the things that need to be done. But over time, and this happens, once in a while, and you figure out that it was, something like this was probably not a good idea, and obviously we have seen that FEMA doesn't work nearly as well as it did when it was an independent agency and answered directly to the president, and the administrator, was able to lead coordinated and government-wide responses to disasters. And so we're just going to take it back. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and it's gotten worse over time. And this isn't a I don't say this is a Democrat or Republican thing at all. It's gotten worse under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations. And, it's just an agency that, for lack of a better term, is kind of fallen through the cracks in many cases. And it's also an agency that, people depend on in a big way when they need it. And when they need, help right now, nobody expects a flood. Nobody expects a tornado. Or a disaster to hit them. It happens, and when it does happen, it's devastating, and and people need that relief just as quickly as they can get it.
I would definitely agree, based off people who I've talked to, that the problems that you just described with FEMA predate the Trump administration. They were there during the George W. Bush administration, the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration. But I do have to ask this question. There's been reports that the president's administration cut a lot of jobs from FEMA at the beginning of his second term. Do you think that has had a negative impact on the way that this agency has been able to respond to disasters in the first 8-9 months of the year?
To be honest with you, I don't think so, because one of the things we have found out is there are a lot of individuals in some of these agencies, and FEMA being one of them, that either they're duplicative or They simply are there in charge of programs that either don't exist or nobody uses anymore. And so you have to ask the question, what is it you do? And, when you can't get an answer, that is extraordinarily frustrating and makes you wonder, we continue to have people in positions, continue to pay people in positions, yet nobody can answer the question on what it is that their position is supposed to be doing. And so with that came a for lack of a better term, a cleanup or trying to streamline these agencies and make them more efficient, and then come back, and if we need to add people in places that need that, the help or the extra manpower, then we can look to do that. But that was the intent in the beginning, and that's exactly what the intent should have been. Instead of continuing to grow, these agencies, and particularly in places where individuals aren't needed, we need to cut back and then reevaluate.
So this is probably like the $64,000 question. What do you think the chances of this bill making it through Congress are? It is a bipartisan bill. You're working on it with other Democratic members, I think, of the Transportation Committee. And have you spoken with President Trump or his administration kind of about whether he likes these ideas or not?
Again, the president knows that FEMA is broken, and he wants to see it fixed. And we have had conversations with the administration about doing this. They are very interested in it. Obviously, this is a very bipartisan bill, and I think we're going to pass it out of the House overwhelmingly and then get it over the Senate. It's hard to, I can't predict what the Senate's going to do. It's hard to predict what the Senate's going to ever do. And so hopefully they will see if this has a strong bipartisan vote in the House, that puts a lot of pressure on the Senate to get something done and get something passed, because that means the public is very interested in seeing this done. And so that helps out considerably. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to get this done. We've been able to do a lot of things in the Transportation Committee. We have passed a very bipartisan water resources development bill. We passed a very bipartisan FAA reauthorization. We've passed a very bipartisan safety bill. Just a variety of things that we have worked on, and we've been able to pass it. We pass it out of committee, extraordinarily bipartisan, and so that helps considerably when you have the backing of both sides. It basically streamlines it.
That was Congressman Sam Graves, who represents Missouri's 6th Congressional District, which encompasses most of northern Missouri. I spoke with him last week. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk with Missouri Attorney General Catherine Hanaway about her first few weeks on the job. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Catherine Hanaway already possessed sterling professional credentials before Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe appointed her Attorney General. She served as the first and to date only female Missouri Speaker of the House, as well as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri. And after leaving the U.S. Attorney post and embarking on an unsuccessful bid for governor, Hanaway established a successful private sector career at Husch Blackwell, becoming the law firm's chair in 2021. Now a little over a month into her tenure in the high-profile statewide office, Hanaway is laying out her priorities, with a particular focus on fighting crime and defending Missouri's abortion restrictions. I spoke with Hanaway on Tuesday, just hours before a judge revoked the bond of St. Louis Sheriff Alfred Montgomery and sent him to jail. The conversation about Montgomery happens a bit later in this interview. I should also note that I spoke with Hanaway before she filed a federal lawsuit aimed at stifling a referendum placing a new congressional map up for a statewide vote in 2026. I first asked Hanaway how her new job as Attorney General compares to being Missouri Speaker of the House or U.S. Attorney.
Yeah, it is very different, and I've spent some time contemplating that. As Speaker of the House, you still, you have to persuade 82 other people to agree with you in order to pass something out of the House. Then you still have to go to the Senate and the governor. As U.S. Attorney, you have a lot of autonomy, but there's still sort of main justice above you. In this job, the buck pretty much stops with me. Now, obviously, I want to coordinate and work with the governor and his team, and we represent all the departments of the state. And so those relationships are extremely important, but the final decision usually lies with me.
I think one of the most interesting things to watch here is, in some respects, you come from a completely different era of Missouri politics. Some would say a better era, because the 2000s era of Missouri politics is probably my favorite because it reminds me when I was much younger. But you're a former Kit Bond staffer and a former George W. Bush appointee in a Donald Trump world. How do you navigate the political reality now when it's so different from when you started?
Well, I'll be the first to admit that I have a lot to learn, because I've spent the last, 15 years-ish with a little bit of a hiatus to run for governor in 2016. But I've spent that time period practicing law and trying to be the best lawyer I could be, and then leading a major national law firm and trying to be the best business person that I could be, and not day-to-day consumed by what was happening in the political world. Obviously, I'm very interested and, stayed up to some degree on everything, but I don't know the people the way that I did previously, and still sort of learning the nomenclature. I've always been a conservative. I think that this is a great evolution of the conservative movement. The things that the president is accomplishing are unlike a pace that we've seen from any other president. And so, as I said, the learning curve is steep.
Several of your predecessors prioritized weighing in on federal issues, especially when there was a Democratic president in charge. Do you plan to do that as well? Are you going to be laser focused on Missouri-based issues?
So I'm going to be laser focused on making sure that we uphold the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States, and that we protect Missourians from anyone who would do them harm. That's really the agenda, and that will mean that there are times when we participate along either taking the lead or alongside other attorneys general around the country. There will also be a much bigger emphasis on things like consumer fraud, Medicaid fraud, telemarketers who would rip people off. We have a disaster recovery team that hopefully people are already calling in and utilizing our resources for things like when they get ripped off by gypsy roofers as they're trying to recover from the tornado.
You mentioned something that has been on my mind every time I pick up my phone. I'm sure you have gotten a lot of texts from people that you don't know asking you, when are you coming to dinner? Or I want to meet you at the movies. And if you actually text them back, it is actually a sophisticated organized crime scam trying to bilk you out of money. Is there anything the Attorney General's office can do, considering a lot of those entities are overseas and may not be in the jurisdiction of the Attorney General's office on paper?
Well, one of the things that we can do, and one of the things I think I'm kind of uniquely positioned to do, is work in conjunction with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's offices to get those cases reviewed, because, as you just pointed out, we have limited ability as a state enforcement authority, but we definitely have some ability to go after those people since they're victimizing Missourians. And that is the kind of thing that I want to focus on. I get those text messages too, like, this is so-and-so from the IRS, and we need to talk to you about resolution of your bill. if anyone calls you and says that, it is a scam. Just if you made the mistake of picking up your phone, I'd encourage people to say, "I'll tell you what, I'd be happy to put you in touch with my lawyer, and I can reassure you that they'll just hang up at that point and you won't hear from them again."
When you were a U.S. attorney and when you were a gubernatorial candidate, you often emphasized a desire to fight crime throughout the state. What could you do as Attorney General to actually make Missourians safer?
So I think that there are a number of things, and we're working really hard on getting all of this set up right now. We will lend some of our assistant attorneys general to the two U.S. attorneys' offices in St. Louis and Kansas City to increase their capacity to do cases, and specifically violent crime cases, cases where it's felons in possession of firearms. I've had great conversations with both of those offices already. The next, kind of categorical scourge that I see that is really hurting our cities is the proliferation of illegal drugs, and it's really kind of at both ends of the spectrums. At one end, you have fentanyl, which is just taking people's lives from them at an absolutely alarming rate. And so trying to stem the flow of fentanyl into our community, but also working with local authorities to get those fentanyl abusers into either treatment or some kind of a shelter. And then with respect to marijuana, we have recreational marijuana in Missouri. There are plenty of places you can go and buy it. And yet a whole industry has cropped up around THC derived from hemp, which is kind of a loophole in the federal law, and it's being sold in gas stations, restaurants, and people don't know that it's an intoxicating form of marijuana, and maybe highly intoxicating. There's not good testing on it. Kids can buy it, and it's really a threat to the well-being of Missourians. So we're going to be going after that really hard. And then the last thing is that we will be, taking a position that anytime, and this has always been true, but I think I'm going to be more aggressive than maybe some of my predecessors in saying to local prosecutors, look, we've got capacity. How can we help you? How can we get more cases? How can we reduce the number of murder cases that haven't been resolved? And I'm fortunate that I have great relationships with Gabe Gore and with Melissa Price Smith.
So before he left to become Deputy FBI Director, I spoke with now former Attorney General Andrew Bailey about how his office would now be legally responsible for defending the city of St. Louis's police department in civil litigation cases. What do you think you could do on that front to make sure the city police department can function at a high level?
Well, we absolutely want to defend those cases as aggressively as we possibly can. We did get a ruling from Judge Josh Devine that makes that a little bit more complicated. He sort of reads the statute as giving us a more narrow jurisdiction to take on those cases, and that the city itself should be continuing to defend some of those cases. We will continue to work in the cases that we can to advocate in a respectful way that recognizes that there is now precedent from Judge Devine. And if we're not able to get sort of the broad scope of authority that we think the statute grants, we'll go back to the legislature and try and get that next session. That was all very technical. The short way to say this is that we want to back our men in blue, men and women in blue, however we can. It's a big responsibility the state has taken on to lead that department, and we're a small part of that, but an important part, and we are very happy to be able to play that part.
Meanwhile, the other major STL-related case you're involved in is the bid to oust St. Louis Sheriff Alfred Montgomery from office. As succinctly as you can, why do you think he needs to be removed from office?
Well, very succinctly, he's abused his power, and that is what is so scary about this case. He's abused his powers to have his deputies running his kids around on official time. He he handcuffed one of his deputy commissioners, which is really a false arrest. And he used taxpayer-funded vehicles to chauffeur and supervise his children. He also refused to transport for medical care almost 60 prisoners. So on the one side of the ledger, he's abusing his power by using it to sort of enhance himself. And on the other side of the ledger, he's not doing the job. And that is the perfect set of facts for what we call a quo warranto action to remove him from office. And he should be removed from office.
A judge denied your request to remove him from office on Friday after he was indicted on federal felony charges. This is the third such request from your office, and retired Judge Stephen Ulmer said, I am not, for the third time, going to follow through with your request to remove him. I need hard evidence of what it is and not what you say it is or what Montgomery says it is. We need to have a trial and evidence before I can make a ruling in your favor or his favor. Enough is enough, the judge says. It really sounds like some parent energy going on there where he says, don't ask again. What did you make of what the judge said of your request?
Look, I'm sure the judge is very frustrated. We moved for a summary judgment, and that means that some of the facts are uncontested. We do believe the fact that he imprisoned the deputy commissioner, used resources to chauffeur his kids around, didn't transport prisoners, that all of those are uncontested. Sheriff Montgomery now is suggesting that they are contested. And so all Judge Ulmer is saying is we need to have a trial before I'm going to remove him. And we were surprised, I will say, that after the federal indictments, the judge was on felony charges, that the judge was not willing to remove the sheriff, particularly since he's on house arrest and wearing an ankle bracelet. Just don't see how he can be fulfilling his duties when he's facing all of that. But, Judge Ulmer wants to get it right, and he thinks a trial is the way to get it right. And so certainly have to respect his decision.
You talked about getting in the weeds earlier, so I'm going to get a little weedy here. There is a Missouri Supreme Court case from 1995 that lays out what's known as the willful neglect standard to oust someone from office. And I think certainly a really strong case could be made that Montgomery spent money unwisely, pursued poor policy choices. The chauffeuring of the kids could be seen as not good. That's the best adjective I could think of at the moment. But again, if he's not convicted of a felony, shouldn't voters ultimately be the judge of whether that's enough to remove him from office?
Well, you pointed to willful neglect. I mean, refusing to transport 60 prisoners who needed medical care is absolutely neglect. Like, I don't think this is a close case. He is not doing the job of being the sheriff and should be removed so that we can get somebody in there who will do the job. As we face, I think that crime and public safety are the biggest issues preventing St. Louis from coming back. And then we have a sheriff who's using the resources of the office to serve himself and then refusing to use them to do the job he's been elected to do. He should go.
Moving on to abortion, one of your major responsibilities going forward is defending the state's existing restrictions, especially after the passage of what's known as Amendment 3, which enshrined abortion rights into the Constitution. How do you defend the state's current laws when the Constitution guarantees the right to reproductive freedom?
Well, look, this is really a legal issue in terms of the breadth of Amendment 3. Did Amendment 3 legalize abortion and repeal every single restriction ever passed by the Missouri General Assembly? Or did it legalize abortion, but some of those restrictions stayed on the books? And I think the ballpark number is, close. I shouldn't guess, but it's in the low hundreds, or so. It's a lot of statutes. We have prevailed in defending one of those, the one that requires parental consent for a minor to have an abortion. We don't know which other ones, and it may be a statute by statute basis. It's a substantial amount of litigation.
You will also be tasked with defending the new congressional map that lawmakers approved last month. Why do you think this map will withstand the litany of legal challenges that have been thrown against it since last month?
Because it is more constitutional than the prior map. It's more compact. The districts have closer to equal numbers of people in each of them. There are a number of counties that were divided under the old map that have been reunited, like St. Charles and Boone. So I think that it is a much more defensible map under what the Missouri Constitution says, which is after the census that you should draw a map that is as compact and as equal in population between districts as is possible.
The biggest argument that Republicans have said to say that it's constitutional is that the constitutional amendment that lays out the process for redistricting does not have an explicit prohibition on redistricting in the middle of the decade. I'm going to be very candid with you. It's very similar to the film Air Bud, where they argued that Air Bud could play basketball because there's no rule explicitly saying a dog cannot play basketball. Now, you are free to criticize my metaphor here, but do you think that I think that is? I mean, if the Supreme Court says no, you can't do it mid-decade, it's over. That is the whole ball game here.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, when the Supreme Court makes a ruling, and we have to abide by that law. I haven't seen Air Bud. It's not a bad analogy. That is the argument. It does not. The Constitution says that redistricting shall happen after the decennial census. It doesn't say that it shall happen immediately after, that it should happen only once per decade, that it can't be revisited, during the span of the decade. There isn't a limitation. And so I don't know what happened to Bud. I'm guessing he probably didn't get to play basketball since you're using that analogy, but I think our chances of prevailing are pretty good. I mean, I think that the Constitution says what it says, and the current judicial climate is inclined to uphold the words written in the Constitution in their plain meaning.
Well, I have some good news for you, Madam Attorney General. Not only did Buddy get to play basketball, he also got to play football in the classic film Air Bud, Golden Receiver.
Man, I have missed a whole genre. I really got to catch up on that.
That was Missouri Attorney General Catherine Hanaway. She was appointed to that post last month after her predecessor, Andrew Bailey, became Deputy Director of the FBI. I spoke with Hanaway on Tuesday.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.